The American Revolution. Why colonize? The New World had new political, economic, and military opportunities. Settlers realized that there were more well-paying jobs and cheap land than England. Others came for religious freedom. Motivations would include to earn a better living, free or cheap land, to worship freely. 13 colonies. New England colonies earned their money by trading. They would include Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. The middle colonies earned their money by growing and selling wheat. They would include New York, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The southern colonies earned their money by growing and selling tobacco. They would include Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Navigation Acts. They were a series of laws that restricted the use of foreign ships and trade between every country except Britain. Ended 200 years later. The Navigations Act sought to keep all benefits of trade inside the empire and minimize the loss of gold and silver. The French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. It was fought against the colonies of British America and New France. The colonies were supported by the countries of Great Britain, and New France was supported by France. 1754, George Washington ambushed a French patrol. 1755, 6 colonial governors met with General Edward Bedrock to plan a four-way attack on the French. July 9, 1755, Battle of Montgolfier, Bedrock was defeated and died a few days later. 1755, 1757, British operations failed due to combustion of poor management, internal divisions, Canadian scouts, French forces, and Indian warrior allies. 1758, 1760, British military succeeded in capturing territory surrounding the colonies of Canada. They were defeated at Santa Foy in Quebec, and the French ceded Canada in accordance with the Treaty of 1763. Britain won. English debt. The British soldiers would be needed to defend the American colonists. This would cost about £300,000 per year. The British thought that the colonists should pay for their own protection. The war cost the British Treasury £7 million. This doubled their debt. King George III, born June 4, 1738, and died January 29, 1820, took the throne in the year 1751. He wanted to keep his distance from his German forebears. He surrendered the crown estate to the parliamentary control for the support of his household and the expenses of civil government. He agreed with the reasoning and supported the Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765. Proclamation of 1763, issued by King George III on October 7, 1763, forbade all settlement past the line drawn along the Appalachian Mountains. Ensured the British culture and laws were applied in Upper Canada after 1791. Dealt with the management of inherited French colonies from the French-Indian War. Established government for 4 areas: Quebec, West Florida, East Florida, and Grenada. The Sugar Act, 1764, regulated the trade and the raise of revenue. London could only be exported to Britain. Ship captains were required to maintain detailed manifests of the cargo. New England ports especially suffered economic losses because the stricter enforcement made smuggling molasses more dangerous and risky. By reducing the tax rate by half and then expanding measures to enforce the act, the British hoped that the more reasonable tax could be effectively collected. Stamp Act. British Parliament exacted revenue from American colonies by imposing a stamp duty on newspapers and legal commercial documents. Required all American colonists to pay a tax on every piece of printed paper they used. The money was used to help pay the cost of defending and protecting the American frontier in the new Appalachian Mountains. The Sons of Liberty, an organization of American colonists that was created in 13 American colonies. Made to protect the right of colonists and fight taxation by British government. A formal underground organization with recognized members and leaders. The name was an underground term for any men resisting the new crown taxes and laws. Some members would include Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Oliver Wolcott. The Boston Massacre. March 5, 1770, British Army soldiers killed 5 male civilians and injured 6 others. A mob formed around British sentry who was subjected to verbal abuse and harassment. He was supported by 8 additional soldiers who were subjected to verbal threats and thrown objects. They fired on the ground, instantly killing 3 people and wounding others. 8 soldiers, 1 officer, 4 civilians were arrested and charged with murder. Tea Act. The principal objective was to reduce the massive surplus of tea held by the financially troubled British East India Company and its London warehouses, and to help the struggling company survive. The act granted the company the right to directly ship its tea to North America and the right to the duty-free export of tea from Britain. The Boston Tea Party. December 16, 1773, the Sons of Liberty held a political protest. Samuel Adams and a group of people named the Sons of Liberty dressed up as Native Americans and went onto the ships of the Boston harbor. They took the boxes of tea and dumped them into the water. The British government made even stricter laws, which included the Intolerable Acts that said that the colonists were not allowed to go back to Boston harbor until the colonists paid for all the teas. Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Published in 1776, challenged the authority of British government and the royal monarchy. The plain language that Paine used spoke to the common people of America. It was the first work openly asked for independence from Great Britain. The Enlightenment thinkers: John Locke, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. Declaration of Independence. July 4, 1776, Americans were no longer under the British rule. Colonies united to become a new kingdom. Signed by 56 men, Thomas Jefferson did most of the writing. Jefferson wrote about the rights of the people and the role of the government. He also lists specific bad things that the government of Great Britain did. The colonies would now be free to independent states. Revolutionary War Part 1. British military was well equipped, disciplined, paid, and well fed. British Navy dominated seas. The funds for Britain's military was easily raised. Since the British were fighting from home, it would sometimes take months for the supply to them to reach. Americans thought that their cause was so big that the fuel of the fight kept going. Americans' alliance with the French gave Americans the courage to intangible threat to tip the scales in Americans' favor. George Washington led the Continental Army. General William Howe led the British Army. The Revolutionary War started April 19, 1775, and ended on May 12, 1784. Revolutionary War Part 2. The Loyalists were Americans who remained loyal to the British Crown during the American Revolutionary War. Battle of Lexington. April 19, 1775, 700 British troops marched into Lexington to capture Patriot leaders and seize Patriot arsenal. They found 77 armed Minutemen waiting for them. The Minutemen were then told to disperse, and they drifted away until one shot was made and a cloud of musket smoke covered the green. 8 Americans lay dead and 10 wounded. 1 British soldier was injured. Battle of Trenton. First major victory in the Continental Army. Raised the morale of American troops. Led soldiers to re-enlisting and future enlistments. Captured over 1,000 soldiers. Weapons, food, and etc. American Army crossed the Delaware into the Valley of Pennsylvania. Battle of Saratoga. The General Hartog Gates surrounded the British and help of Benedict Arnold. British defeat stopped them from cutting off New England from the rest of the country. British lacked knowledge of geography and failed at communications. General Hartog Gates surrounded British and forced the surrender of 6,000 troops, led to a military alliance with France, providing soldiers, naval fleet, and money. The British surrendered in Yorktown in 1781. America won. The Treaty of Paris, signed in Paris by representatives of King George III and representing the United States of America. This ended the American Revolutionary War. Britain had to recognize the new nation and remove all troops from the nation. It set new borders for the United States. The United States had to allow the British troops to leave and pay all debts owed to Britain. Articles of Confederation was an agreement among 13 original states in the United States of America. The original 5-page articles contained 13 articles, a conclusion, a signatory section. It left the 13 states and the central government with no separation of powers. The central government had no national executive court system. The government had no power to collect taxes, raise an army, or even regulate trade. Constitution. It's the natural frame of government. Its first three articles are the separation of powers. The first 10 amendments together are called the Bill of Rights. The Constitution was better than the Articles of Confederation because the Articles of Confederation had many weaknesses. The Constitution created the federal government, along with federalism, dividing the power between the states and central government. The election of Washington. As a former leader of the Continental Army and the chairman of the Continental Congress, Washington possessed the necessary credentials for the presidency. He was elected on February 4, 1789. Washington's humility meshed well with the new nation's democratic sensibilities.